So we are here tonight with Kelly Jacobs. Hey, Kelly, thanks so much for joining
Hey,
us.
thank you.
Kelly is a very talented, multi-talented individual. She's a photographer. Actually, my wife and I first met her because she took some family photos, not once, but twice, of our family, and they turned out amazing.
Thank
So
you.
if you need some photos, go check out Kelly's page. We'll link to all that later. But she's also a registered counselor, and she has a passion for counseling and for therapy. And again, I'm not going to steal her thunder. I'm going to hand it over to her and let her introduce herself. But we're so privileged to be able to have a conversation with her tonight, because tonight we're going to be talking about trauma. But before we get into that kind of stuff, Kelly, can you take a moment and just share with everyone who you are and what you're all about?
Thank you so much. Firstly, oh, sorry about that. But thank you so much, firstly, just for having me on this space and even just have this conversation, because exactly as we had mentioned before, this is all that we do this for. It's for connection and for connecting with people. And it's my heart's desire, firstly, to further the kingdom, but also to connect with other people, because we build relationships. So for me, what I do in life is I'm a photographer, exactly as you mentioned, but also a registered counselor. We provide a safe space for anybody to come and be able to talk and navigate through difficulties that they may be facing in life. And maybe not even just difficulties, but getting to know themselves more, finding mental health kind of support that may be needed at different stages in life. So I started my private practice about a year ago. In the midst of a pandemic, I was one of those crazy individuals that tried to start a business. But I found that it's been such an amazing blessing, because it's been the perfect time that everybody may have found challenges with their mental health where they didn't necessarily find that they would struggle with it before. And it just provided a safe space, and it's continuing to provide a safe space. Now, currently, I'm running my practice online and I'm providing the services online. But for the past year, I've been blessed to be able to be in practice, in private practice, just helping and growing and advocating for mental health support within the community and providing affordable and accessible therapeutic services. So just in a nutshell, that's who Kelly is and what it is that I do.
Well, thank you for what you do, Kelly, and thank you for your time. And we're going to jump straight into the convo tonight. As I mentioned earlier, we're talking about trauma, and this has been a bit of a hot topic lately. Yeah. I've seen it on social media. I've seen it in different places, and I think the events of the past probably 18 months have brought this kind of subject to the forefront. And I think in light of everything that we've been going through here in South Africa over the past couple weeks, I think that it's become a very relevant conversation. And so we just wanted to create a safe space and bring an expert into the conversation for us to be able to talk about trauma. And really our heart in this conversation is to, if you're tuning in, our heart is really to be able to help people to recognize trauma that they go through, because I think if you're a human being and you've lived life, you've probably experienced trauma.
Absolutely.
We want to be able to create a safe space for people to be able to kind of process that, and then once we recognize it, how do we handle it? How do we navigate it in a way that leads us to health and to wholeness? And so as we jump in the conversation, Kelly, I'm going to throw you the first question. Whenever we hear the word trauma, we might think of a lot of different things, and we might come to the table with a lot of different definitions, but how have you defined trauma in a way that's helpful?
Exactly as you said, because trauma is such a unique experience, it's so difficult to find a definition that does encompass its fullness of what it is, because we experience it in different ways. Exactly as you said, in South Africa, there's been such a lot of different situations that we've been needing to navigate through. It has been extremely difficult and challenging to be able to navigate through. But almost every individual on this planet has experienced trauma in some way or another. Because often there's this misconception when we're talking about trauma, it's having experienced this extremely horrific event and causing this adverse reactions within us. And when we're talking about trauma, it's often we associated with things like a hijacking, or things in South Africa, it's quite common, but things like a hijacking, experiencing somebody close by that has been murdered or raped or anything like that. But the definition I would personally give to trauma, if I had to define it, I would describe it as being anything that's deeply distressing or disturbing. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's limited to an event, but it can include any traumatic experience as well. So exactly as we've been going through in South Africa, that is a form of trauma. And when we're talking about this concept of trauma, we're talking about having a reaction to something that is a horrible experience. So if I had to find a definition to encompass all of it, that is exactly what I would define it as being. And even though trauma is something that is a normal reaction, it can sometimes have the effect that it can be so severe that it can interfere with somebody's ability to function and live a normal life. So the action that we have when it comes to trauma can be different for each and every individual, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But if I had to define trauma, I would say it's mostly not just limited to an event, but it can be an experience too.
It's so great that you bring that up, Kelly, and I think it really it opens up the conversation for those out there that maybe like you said, I've never gone through this horrifically tragic event, but I'm feeling something inside of me and I've never maybe felt it before. Maybe I've suppressed these emotions and I don't know what's going on. It's affecting me, but I don't know how to recognize it. And so that's kind of leads me to my next question is, if in the way that you define trauma, how do we recognize whenever trauma has happened to us? How do we recognize that it's actually affecting a thing?
Yeah. And that's exactly it. You don't even know some of the signs that you could be experiencing trauma, because it doesn't necessarily mean that it's one horrific event that you have gone through. But some of the common reactions, and I'm going to list some of the emotional reactions and psychological reactions that are common, and some of the physical reactions that are common. But I do want to note and point out it can be different for every single person. Some of these signs and these symptoms can also be present in your life to different degrees. It can be mild and it can be a little bit more severe. So I do want to point that out and note that. But some of the common reactions when it comes to emotional effects can be feelings of fear, feelings of guilt, feelings of sadness, anger, confusion, denial, even feelings of shame, feeling emotionally numb. And a lot of people that describe going through trauma and feeling like they're having this reaction to a traumatic event or occurrence that has gone through their life, describe it as being you feel different to what you normally are. You feel like you're not necessarily yourself. So if those are any of the feelings that you may be feeling and not necessarily recognizing the emotional or psychological place that you find yourself at, chances are you're probably having a traumatic reaction. And some of those things that does include on the physical side and the physical symptoms and signs can include difficulty concentrating, having headaches and experiencing headaches more frequently than usual, having any sort of digestive problems that you may not have noticed that you had before, racing heart, sweaty palms, or feeling sweaty in general, feeling jumpy, feeling super hypervigilant, sometimes having difficulty sleeping where you wouldn't necessarily have the difficulties before. And some of these are just some of the reactions. But if you are finding that these are some of the reactions physically or emotionally that you've been having that you did not necessarily recognize that you had before, and when I talk about before, I don't mean prior to a traumatic event. I'm talking about even if it's been accumulated over time period and you've been noticing some of these signs and symptoms that something within you just doesn't feel right. That can be some indication that you are having a reaction to trauma. You are having a reaction that isn't necessarily in alignment to how you would normally function.
Wow. So, you offered us the kind of a laundry list of things that could point to, to recognizing trauma. Sometimes, we ignore those things because some of those emotions and things that are things that we experience on a daily basis, if we allow trauma to kind of go unrecognized and unprocessed in a healthy way, what are some of the effects of trauma, both in the short term and in the long term, whenever we, don't handle the traumas that we've been through in a healthy way?
Yeah, exactly as you mentioned, when it goes unprocessed and unrecognized, sometimes when we're talking about trauma, when we're talking about processing trauma, there's this general expectation that trauma needs to be processed by talking it through. And that is true, but it doesn't necessarily work for everybody. But I'll get into that a little bit later. But when you're talking about trauma and recognizing some of the signs, I think you're absolutely correct in saying that it does look like feelings that you would experience on a daily basis. So how do you discern between that and the difference between that and what a trauma reaction is?
Yeah.
And I think the major difference and the biggest difference is the amount of time you go feeling this way. So if you've been experiencing difficulty sleeping, or if you've been experiencing feeling like you are hyper aroused and constantly in the space of being hyper vigilant and hyper alert to things, and not necessarily having a reason for why you may be jumpy, but for a prolonged period of time, that's when it starts to become something that's an unhealthy reaction, and it can lead to further mental disorders. So normally if it is a traumatic event that has occurred in your life, within that first 72 hours to the first 4 weeks, all of these symptoms and signs that I had mentioned before is completely normal. And it's something that every single person that has gone through a traumatic experience is bound to be able to feel or react in certain ways. But it becomes unhealthy and it can develop into further mental issues and problems and disorders when it's left untreated or unprocessed for long. And some of the long-term effects, I'm actually going to just mention some of the things that I experience in a lot of clients that I work with. But when it goes untreated, it can develop into further psychopathology or mental disorders. And some of the most severe responses to trauma also includes having a period of continuous distress for a long period of time, and it goes on for a while without necessarily having breaks where you feel like you can rest or be calm. Having and experiencing maybe some sort of dissociative symptoms. So in psychology, there's a term that we use to describe this dissociative symptoms, that is depersonalization. So feeling as though you're detached from your feelings, feeling as though you're emotionally numb and you can't necessarily recognize some of these feelings. And when you're in that emotional state or that feeling of numbness for a long period of time, you start to not even be able to recognize some of the things that may be happening beneath the surface. And it can show up in your life by different uncontrollable ways. For example, being triggered by something that you see on TV, or being triggered by a smell that reminds you of a traumatic event that occurred. I've had a lot of clients that have reported when they've gone through something that was maybe difficult, having a fight with a loved one, or in a relationship where they had an argument. And at the time when they're having an argument that was significantly upsetting, there was the smell of food being cooked. And every time they're triggered by that smell, it triggers the exact same reaction of the feeling that they had at the time that the trauma was experienced and that it occurred.
Wow.
So if it goes untreated and for long periods of time, if those emotional reactions to trauma is unprocessed, it can develop into further mental disorders. And some of those mental disorders include things that you must have heard of before: post-traumatic stress disorder or acute stress disorder. And when we're talking about PTSD, we're talking about having unprocessed trauma for a period of longer than 4 weeks. So ongoing, having their problems when it comes to trouble sleeping, experiencing nightmares, having flashbacks of traumatic events, talking about panic attacks, and these sort of severe reactions normally comes from a place of having unprocessed trauma.
Wow. You know, as you're saying that, yeah, so insightful, so enlightening. Thank you for sharing that, Kelly. And you know, I think yeah, I might take our question in a little bit different direction, but whenever I think about these kind of long-term and short-term effects of trauma, and this is kind of leading it maybe into the next question, but there are things that we can experience on a personal level. I think things that we personally experience, but could trauma also be kind of a collective experience? Is that such a thing? Is there such a thing as collective trauma in addition to something that I interpersonally experience? Could there be something where we all go through something together that's very difficult? Like, can you unpack that a little bit?
Yes, definitely. I think to answer your question, we experiencing that as a nation right now, with everything that has been going on and the violence that's been going on within KZN, is the result of, the looting and the protests is the result of corruption and lack of resources and poverty that has been ongoing for years. And a crisis and a phenomenon such as poverty is something that I would personally describe as being a collective trauma, because the effects of that are long lasting, and we all feel that together, whether you're in a position of privilege or in a position of being underprivileged and under-resourced in some way or another. And I'm not speaking this for all, I'm making a blanket statement for all. Everybody experiences things differently, and I do want to reiterate that. But for example, if you're sitting in a position of privilege, that guilt that's associated with that and feeling helpless and hopeless and not being able to do about that causes some sort of frustration within you. And not recognizing that frustration as being that frustration and leaving it unprocessed and having it just remain dormant within you, it builds up over time period. Same way as if you are in a position of being underprivileged, a collective trauma like poverty, for example, or like crime or corruption, it affects every single degree and avenue of life and every sort of different dimension of life. So I do agree and think that there is such a thing as a collective trauma that is felt even greater than just in the individual space. Because if you think about it and think about your own personal experiences, if you had gone through something traumatic, and yeah, making reference to a traumatic event, if you had gone through an accident, a car accident, and you were severely injured, not only the physical effects of that would be something that you take some time to be able to recover, but those around you that are caring for you are also giving of the emotional energy and the emotional capacity to be able to help nurture you and support you through that time. But the effects of that accident is not only just specialized to the individual person, it's also felt by the community around. So I think that it does give evidence that collective trauma is something that's very real and it's something can be felt. And there's something, sorry to break your word there, but there is something known as collective compassion fatigue. And compassion fatigue refers to this process of being burnt out and emotionally depleted because of caring for others, because of being able to be in that position of nurturing others, but doing it to the extent where you're giving beyond what it is that you have to give. So I think when it comes to this process of navigating through trauma, it can be felt by the community that offers the support to an individual that has gone through trauma, or even a collective body that has gone through trauma. So it is something that's important and worthwhile recognizing as being trauma.
Wow. Now I'm about to throw a huge question at you, Kelly. And it's we may need multiple episodes to unpack this, but whenever we were talking about the individual traumas we go through, we're talking about collective trauma that has been experienced as a nation, that we've seen the effects of it, unprocessed trauma kind of spill over into the streets over the past several weeks. And in many ways, we're still kind of sitting on pins and needles, like wondering what's going to happen here. How do we even begin to deal with personal or collective trauma in a healthy way so that we don't begin to act out of this place of unhealthiness?
Yes. Yeah. It's so difficult, but exactly as you mentioned, it starts with recognizing it to begin with. As they commonly say, you have to recognize and admit to a problem before you can even address it. The same comes to when we're referring to this conversation about our mental health and our trauma and the effects of it. Before we can start addressing it, it's important to firstly recognize that you may be experiencing a reaction to trauma, whether it is individually or whether it's collectively. I think everything in terms of the effects of South Africa, but not only limited to what's going on in South Africa, the world as a whole, what we're going through now, the COVID-19 pandemic, is something that no human being on this planet was prepared for.
Yeah.
No human being on this planet knew that this was going to come. So there's this general loom of uncertainty that's constantly lingering, that's constantly got everybody on edge. So I think first and foremost, before we can even address it, it starts by being able to identify that feelings of feeling unsafe. Those feelings of feeling as though you don't necessarily have that stability. And once you recognize those feelings and emotions, then first steps first is always safety. Safety is a basic human need that all of us have. So I would advise, when you are struggling with this process of working through and navigating through any effects of trauma, first and foremost, ensure that you are safe physically and emotionally in a space where, if you are feeling feelings of adversity or feelings of unsafety, get to a space where you feel safe. Whether that is in terms of a household setting, whether that is in terms of seeking counseling services, whatever it may look like for you. Safety is first and foremost, and recognizing what that means. Yeah.
Wow. Um,
Sorry, I just want to add to that a little bit more
yeah,
as well. When you're
yeah,
talking about trauma and going through trauma, I think what's also important in terms of navigating through that is having healthy coping skills. And when I'm talking about healthy coping skills, I'm talking about having the ability to be able to respond to, firstly, recognizing the fact that you may be struggling, or you may be feeling that you are a little bit challenged in the area of emotional well-being, or whatever the case may be, but knowing how to respond well to that. Because sometimes when we're feeling sad, or sometimes when we're feeling really emotionally heavy, we don't always make the healthiest choices. It can mean sleeping a little bit longer than what is healthy, eating a little bit more than what is healthy, going towards alcohol, drugs, because it takes away the pain or numbs you. And when you start recognizing some of those signs that you are maybe engaging in self-sabotaging behaviors, that's a point of contention where recognizing that there may be something that's going on within you and in your internal world that may not be in alignment to what's the healthiest choice for you. So looking at your coping skills and what it is that you do on your daily basis and your daily habits, it contributes to the way in which you're going to feel in the long run in terms of the effects of trauma.
it's interesting. You almost use the word the word coping. I'll, you almost use it in a bit of a positive light.
Mm,
Is there a way in which, whenever you think about dealing with the emotions post trauma, um, are there healthy coping mechanisms? And if there are, how do we know when they slip into
mm.
unhealthy coping?
Yeah, I love that question because it is so valid in terms of how do you even know what is right and what is healthy? And I think with each and every individual person, you have this intuition within you, knowing when you're stepping into, say, a space that feels a little bit unsafe. But I would
Mm,
say to identify or define what their coping skills are, it's doing things in order to get you to that place of equilibrium. So when you are feeling at most at peace within yourself, or whatever feeling like yourself may look like, and feeling when you are, we talk about the 8 wheels of, or 8 dimensions of wellness. And something and a tool that I use with clients in therapy is always going back to this concept of the 8 wheels of wellness and 8 dimensions of wellness, ensuring that you have a balance and an equilibrium when it comes to your social health and your social well-being, your emotional health and well-being, ensuring that you're getting your physical basic needs met. So when we're talking about coping skills, we're talking about things that you do to get yourself to a point of being healthy and being at that equilibrium space.
mm,
Because when you're going through trauma, attending to things like your basic tasks in which you need to function, things like eating, getting out of bed in the morning, going to shower and do what you need to do in order to get through your day, it becomes incredibly hard. And when you're finding yourself in a space where you're finding even those sort of skills difficult to do, when we're talking about healthy coping skills, we're talking about embracing healthy habits like being able to go sleep at the same time every night, or maybe choosing to go for a walk or spend time in nature rather than spending time indoors for the day. Any little decision you make like that, which may seem little in the moment, but it has such a significant impact on your mental and your physical health and well-being too. So I think anything that you do in order to cope and feel okay to get to that point of health and feeling like equilibrium and feeling like you're in a mental space of clarity and peace, that would be defined as being healthy, as opposed to the unhealthy side, which leaves you feeling that feelings and exacerbates that feelings of guilt, of shame, of pain, of heartache, and all of those signs that I had mentioned earlier.
mm.
I don't know if that answers your question.
That was beautiful. That was beautiful. How does our faith help us navigate trauma? Um, I think you and I both share. We were talking before the chat and or before we went live,
Yeah.
and we both share a faith in Jesus, and that faith can be a bit of a bedrock.
Mm,
Um, and for many people who lean into faith, it can be the way in which they do engage trauma. So help us navigate. Thank God for medical professionals. Thank God for counselors.
mm.
Um, and how do you kind of integrate your faith into helping people process and navigate trauma?
I definitely think this is a big one, especially when we're going through incidents of trauma. I posted, and just to bring light to this, I posted this quote on Instagram, and we were talking about it in our conversation prior. And what the caption actually said was that if trauma doesn't destroy us, it wakes us up to both our relational capacities and the suffering of others. It doesn't only make us hurt, but it makes us more human, more caring, and more wise. So
Oh,
when we go through this process
Kelly,
of
Kelly,
trauma,
say that again. Say that one more time for the people in the back. Say that one more time.
no, I agree with you. If trauma doesn't destroy us, it
Mm,
wakes us up to both our relational capacities and to the suffering of others. It does not only make us hurt, but it makes us more human, more
mm,
caring, and more wise.
it's good.
Is trauma as God, we've got this general perception that it is all dark and it is all heavy. And it is that within itself. There is so much value in terms of the pain that comes with trauma. I think when it becomes destructive is when we stay in that place. When we stay in that place of pain, when we stay in that place of suffering. And I'm not talking about this dismissing the pain that comes with it and how difficult it actually is to get out of that mental space where you are experiencing trauma and navigating through that. But I think having faith and having a relationship with God is such a powerful tool more than anything else, and a powerful force to be able to hold on to keep hope. Because the only thing that shines and what helps people to get to the other side of trauma is that hope. And that hope comes alive in, I mean, the word of God, that relationship with God. Something, as much as I am a mental health professional, I'm first and foremost a believer too. And something that I personally hold on to and drive my practice by is this verse in Romans 8:28 that says, and we know that God works all things together for the good of those who love him. And holding on, and why it's something that I also get to my heart, is because it speaks of this message of hope, that no matter what it is that we are facing, whether it is severe cases of trauma and severe reactions to trauma, or whether it is more mild ones where we're having a difficult day and just having a reactive response to the day, whatever that may be, having that relationship with God and your faith gives you that resilience, first and foremost, to be able to take the necessary steps in order to cope in healthier manners. But it can also be something that offers an opportunity for growth. It also instills that hope that we need in order to take that next step. And furthermore than just our own individual faith, I believe as being a part of a community of believers can also be that community that surrounds you with the support that's needed, the compassion that's needed to get through trauma, and also that collective sense of understanding and belonging. Because when you're navigating through trauma, it seems like everything around you is dark. Finding that light at the end of the tunnel is hard, but when you have a community that surrounds you, that is rooted in so much love and it's rooted in faith and messages of hope, it helps the walk and the journey to get to that light a little bit more bearable.
Wow. I got a little bit emotional, to be honest, as I was just thinking of what you were sharing, because I think there is, there is so much of a redemptive narrative, I think, in the Christian story, in the way that Jesus lived his life, and he invites us into this redemptive process as we enter into relationship with him. And there's something about, and maybe you can kind of drill down a little bit deeper. I don't want you to repeat yourself, but
Okay.
maybe there's someone out there who's listening, and they've experienced trauma and they've taken some steps to begin to process it in a healthy way, but they just don't have yet that vision of, okay, God can transform this trauma into something that actually makes me more human, makes me more compassionate, makes me more loving. Can you maybe speak to that person through the lens of faith for just a moment, and just share, maybe from even just weaving in your experience as a counselor, how our faith can help us not just see the trauma for what it is, but
Yeah.
that there's life after trauma.
Yeah.
Makes
Yeah.
sense?
No, absolutely. And I think it's such a beautiful shift of perspective, and why I love the conversation around faith and how to use it as a tool to navigate through trauma. And because we lose a sense of identity when we're going through something that is traumatic and rough. and you lose a sense of who you are and what purpose and meaning it is that you give to life. But on the other side of trauma and the other side of that experience, when we're talking about the redemptive story, and I love that you made mention of that within the Bible is such a beautiful love story. It's honestly the greatest love story you're ever going to read on this planet, because it's filled with so many different stories and experiences of how all of us are undeserving of God's grace, and yet He still chooses to give it to us. Whether we have gone through a trauma where it may be an experience of sexual assault, maybe experience of rape, it may be an experience of where you had gone through maybe a hijacking, maybe I've gone through a terrible divorce, and maybe parents have gone through a terrible divorce or lost a loved one, whatever it may be that you may be navigating through in this difficult season. The word is filled with so much beautiful evidence of how God never gave up. He gave up on His people no matter how dark it got. Never gave up on His people no matter how broken any single person in any sort of chapter within the Bible may have seemed at that point, or how dirty or how filthy any sort of person may have seemed to the community around them. God was the one that never gave up and looked at that person within the eyes, with eyes of love, and saw them as the bride of Christ, as pure as can be. And I think it's so beautiful how we filled and how we blessed with this opportunity to be able to have so many different evidences of how it does get better. But to anybody that may be experiencing it, and just even thinking about the way in which God shifts the narrative with every single story within the Bible, He shifts the narrative from being one of darkness to light constantly. And even when we're talking about therapy and therapeutic methods, one method that I personally use in therapeutic intervention that I use is called cognitive behavioral therapy. And with CBT, it's focused on reframing our thoughts, reframing how we see a situation, and not necessarily the situation itself. So no matter what it is that you've been through, the way in which you perceive the situation can have such a powerful impact and difference to how you respond emotionally, how you respond in terms of your behavior, how you show up for yourself and others in the world as well. So not only in a therapeutic intervention, but also faith can be such an important instrument to be able to shift the narrative that no matter what it was that you had experienced or gone through, on the other side of that, how you see it and how it can be used not only for God's glory within your life, but to further the kingdom and to further the, not necessarily the purpose of the trauma, because I never feel that trauma is something that is earned or justified. But I do find that God is the one that shifts it and turns it around for your good and fills it with the message of hope and redemption rather than necessarily being for your destruction.
Mm. Kelly, there might be people out there who, as we've had this conversation, they may be thinking for the first time, like, wow, maybe I have gone through some trauma and that I've never fully processed it. Or maybe they know they've went through trauma,
Yeah.
and they've pushed it into a corner because they just don't want to deal with it. But I think what you've done is you've outlined that, process trauma that's not processed in a healthy way can have long-term effects.
Yeah.
And so for those people who are out there and they're going, I think I want to begin to take some steps. I think I want to begin to engage the healing process of life after trauma. Like, what are some resources or some tools that you can share with us that will help us engage in that healing journey?
Yeah. My first recommendation, unbiasedly, would be to seek counseling, first and foremost. And why it is that I find it to be something that's so important is because going to seek therapeutic support from a trained professional that is able to handle and navigate through trauma. They've been through the process already, maybe personally experienced trauma, but also have that professional training in how to navigate through that steps in a way that is going to be beneficial, and providing a safe space for you to be able to navigate. There's nothing that you're going to be able to tell a therapist, psychologist, and mental health professional that is going to shock them and surprise them. It's going to be a space where you are not going to be judged, whatever it is that you've gone through, and it helps to be able to just talk sometimes and just get it off your chest. So my first recommendation to anybody that is wanting to start the healing process is to seek counseling. But I am also aware of the fact that in South Africa, it's not always the most accessible route to getting the help and the support, which is terrible, but we're working on that as a collective community. But for anybody that does struggle when it does come to the concept of therapy and seeking private mental health counseling, there is the option of attaining those services through NGOs. And some NGOs that you could maybe reach out to is one by the name of Hope House. They offer free counseling services. Another one is called the Counseling Hub. And I'm guessing we're going to leave some of these resources in the description box below. So people
Yeah,
will
we'll
be
for
able
sure,
to.
we'll link to these resources in the description box below the video for sure.
Okay, perfect. Because another one that could be used and could be accessed is called the Trauma Center, which is based in Woodstock. And a lot of these NGOs do offer free counseling services as well. So it's able to be accessible and it's able to be used if the support is needed too. But what I love about the advances in technology is that it makes it so much more accessible, especially when it comes to mental health resources, because there are also so many applications and apps that are available on Play Store, iStore, where you are able to download some apps that can help facilitate that process of healing. Apps, for example, there's one called Body Tree. And with Body Tree, it's an app that you're able to record certain thoughts. And so it's certain different emotions that may be worrying you, and it helps you and guides you through the process of processing those emotions and processing those thoughts. Another example is one that's called Calm. It helps when it comes to meditation, and it helps when it comes to any sort of relaxation processes that you may not necessarily know how to do. That can be a great place to start. There's another one called Declutter the Mind. So there are apps out there to help facilitate the process. Lastly, one of the big encouragements that I do have is to lean on your support system. Sometimes when you're going through trauma, it can be easy, and a lot of people describe it as feeling as though nobody's going to understand. Nobody is going to be able to relate, and nobody is going to be able to provide that safe space. And when you have thoughts like this, it's easy to go into that space of alienation and withdrawing yourself. But that further perpetuates that cycle of shame and of guilt. Whereas you may not know, somebody in your community may have gone through something similar to what it is that you have experienced, or they may not have. But the tools or maybe the support that they can provide to you in that space where you can just feel safe, understood, and loved, and receive messages of love. It's such an important resource that you have access to and that you can access when it's needed. So to anybody that's struggling with trauma, or anybody that's struggling with any sort of pain and suffering, I do want to encourage you to reach out for help and for support in the ways in which works best for you, but to not go through it alone. Yeah. Everything within you, your thoughts may be telling you and guiding you and pulling you to that space we need to go through it alone. But in just from a mental health perspective, and even from a faith-based perspective, I don't believe that any man was meant to exist as an island. We were made for community and we were made for support. So if this is your message, if there's anything that you get out of this conversation today, it's to not go through whatever it is that you're going through alone, and to access support that is accessible to you.
Yeah. Kelly, as we wrap up the conversation, I just feel led to allow you to just pray with those who are tuning in today. And pray how you feel led. Pray for those who are tuning in and they're on different ends of the spectrum when it comes to processing traumatic events. I'd love for you to just take a moment and just pray for those individuals. Is that okay?
Of course, definitely.
Cool.
Awesome. So God, we just want to thank you for anybody that is tuning in, anybody that is watching this or listening to this. You know that you were the force behind leading them to the space, Lord. And anybody that enters into this conversation, that hears it, that's listening to it, no matter what it is that they are facing right now, Lord, I just pray that you give your peace to them. You firstly surround them with your peace and with your love, and allow Holy Spirit to come into this space to be able to lead them to gaining and accessing the support that is accessible to them. Anybody that's listening to this right now, I pray that you allow them to feel love as powerful and as all-encompassing as what your love is, and have them know that it is unconditional, that it is full of so much grace and so much compassion. To anybody listening to this right now, Lord, I just pray that you help guide them and show them the light, and show them that hope is something that they can hold on to not give up, and to hold on to the support that you bring, that you are such an understanding and such a compassionate God, that you will never let anybody go through anything that you don't necessarily have the tools to equip them with in order to navigate through this tough season, Lord. I pray that as any sort of traumatic experience that anybody may go through, not only does it bring them to the end of themselves, but it brings them to a point where they can fully understand and encompass your love and understand the depth of it, that there's no amount of darkness that can overpower the light that you bring, Lord. I just pray that your love will surround this nation, that your love will surround this world as we're going through trials and we're going through troubling times, that love is going to be the greatest story and the redemption story of all of us that have been able to encounter this earth and been able to encounter one another in the beauty of your connection, Lord. I just pray for your peace over all. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Kelly, thank you so much for your time, for lending your expertise, for sharing your heart and your faith. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. How can people stay engaged with you as we leave this platform?
I'd love to firstly stay engaged with anybody that is listening to this space. And you're more than welcome to find me either on my website, which is at www.tdpwithkelly.co.za, or on my social media platforms, which is at TDP with Kelly. I tend to share quite a bit of insight and quite a bit of just encouragements and motivations every single day when it comes to mental health space. So to anybody that's listening, please do give me a shout and follow. I'd love to be able to connect.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for tuning in again, Kelly. Thank you for your time and hope everyone has a blessed day. All right. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. Bye.
Cool. Let me stop recording. All right. Stop recording.